Here we are again in the summer in Manitoba. What used to be a relatively rare occurrence, tornado deaths in Manitoba, let alone in all of Canada, here we are back in the home of the Blue Bombers for what is a recurring nightmare now. Hi, I'm Chris May, writer, producer, and host of This Day in Weather History, now in year 2 from the Weather Network in Canada. Back on the August 3rd episode, just a few days ago on this podcast, I brought to you the 2018 Alonza, Manitoba EF4 tornado. But 2 years later, here we are again, almost to the exact date on this day in weather history. Late that Friday night, Manitoba Premier Brian Pallister tweeted, and I quote, "Our thoughts and prayers go out to the residents of Virden and the emergency responders dealing with the aftermath of the tornado. Please stay safe." Let's begin. The tornado that hit Scarth, Manitoba, a community just south of Virden on the evening of the 7th, was originally estimated to have been an EF2 storm producing 190 km/h winds. The storm damage was surveyed and reviewed through a joint effort of Environment Canada and the Northern Tornadoes Project, a group of investigators with the Western University-based team. But this is why modern tech in the hands of every walking human can, at times, prove invaluable. Shortly after the twister formed, there were countless images and video clips on social media from very sophisticated cell phones of the tornado, and not only that, but there was every conceivable angle and perspective of it too, including some very impressive and conclusive drone footage of the damage path. As a result of this critical intel, EC reviewed the new findings and soon afterward released its revised summary of the tornado, estimating it to have actually been an EF3 storm with wind speeds up to 260 kilometers per hour. Welcome to year 2 of this podcast. Right now, you're listening to the full version of today's story on your favorite podcast provider. But there's also the daily podcast video short. They're shot right here in my podcast recording studio, so you get that perspective. But oftentimes, they will include visuals from that day's event, from when it happened, in weather history. So after listening to the full story, go check out the podcast video short on television or online anytime at theweathernetwork.com/weather history. And just to dovetail from that, if I can, I'd like to remind you where you can catch this podcast. If you might be picking this up off our site or from within a story, you can look up or ask for This Day in Weather History, wherever you normally listen to your favorite podcasts, including Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Alexa, and now every day on yahoo.ca. The tornado was reported by several eyewitnesses to have been on the ground for 10 to 15 minutes while downing power lines as it tore across the land. The damage was real, and it sadly unfolded as deadly as well. Upon arrival, police found extensive damage at a farm. There was a vehicle that was lifted and then literally thrown through the air, landing near a highway. In that vehicle, there was a 54-year-old man inside from Sioux Valley, Dakota First Nation. Thankfully, although shaken and taken to hospital, he suffered serious yet non-life-threatening injuries. However, 2 local teens were not as fortunate. 2 18-year-olds from Melita, Manitoba, Shayna Barnsky and Carter Tilbury, were killed in the tornado. Their vehicle was found more than a kilometer away from the site where the first man was recovered, and the RCMP reported that it is believed the 2 youngsters were thrown from their car during the tornado that tore it up in southwestern Manitoba, this day in weather history. Hey, do you like the podcast? We'd love to hear from you. If you have an idea, go right now to wherever you're listening to me and rate us if you would, please. It's on a 5-star system, and we would love as many stars as you can afford. So rate us, but then also review us. This way we can always stay on top of how you'd like to see the show evolve. Then remember to subscribe to this podcast. Click the subscribe or follow button right there on the very same podcast homepage you're listening on. You'll be immediately reminded that the next day is ready to listen to, and you also have access to every episode in the archives. It dates back to June 1st of 2020, so there is a lot that we got to get caught up on this day in weather history. Tomorrow is August 8th. And this is another sports-related story with a century-old history and tradition that was changed to get in line with the modern times, only to be interrupted in its debut by the weather. I present to you the night the lights went on at Wrigley. Tomorrow on This Day in Weather History with me, your host, Chris May.